Hello, everybody. Good evening and welcome to another Wednesday night Bible study here at Faith Baptist Church's Facebook and YouTube Live. So very glad to have everybody this evening. I hope you're doing well. Hope you're having a great week. I know some of our people not having such a great week. Before we get started this evening, I want to ask you to pray for the Robinson family. They have lost a good man and a dear loved one. Wayne Robinson sadly passed away this week. So do be in prayer for the family, be in prayer for his widowed wife, and just for the whole process. Words cannot begin to describe what some of these people are going through tonight. So just really be in prayer for them, and I would greatly appreciate it. As far as updates on other things go, I don't know that I have a whole lot. I don't know that I've been told any updates on anything. So all the people that you have on our prayer list that you haven't heard from us in a while, just keep praying for all those people, and we will let you know when we know something. If you have an update for us or a new prayer request or anything like that, be sure to leave a comment. Let us know. I will read it out loud for everybody, and we'll do our best to keep us all in each other's prayers. By the way, don't only pray about the people you hear about. Be in prayer for all the members of your church. Be in prayer for all the loved ones. Be in prayer for all the people in your life, all these other churches and pastors and preachers and church members and you know, everybody. Be in prayer for everybody, whether they've got something going on or not. It's a good habit to get into. So, yeah, I want to remind everybody real quick, coming up this Sunday is our soup cooking contest. So you guys that are going to be able to be here, be sure to cook a soup. Be sure to cook enough so that we can do a fellowship out of it. But yes, there will be a little contest. We will have judges, and these judges will determine who wins this special contest. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're looking forward to it. I don't have anything else, but if I see something, I'll read it for you guys and I'll let you know. So at this time, let me turn this off. And let's jump into our Bible study. Yeah, that's the one. All right, so we're in Judges 16 this evening, and I love Judges 16. It's such a great story. And we're going to start, you know what, let me do this where I can see the comments. So let me pull it over here. Okay. Let me make sure my microphone is where you guys can hear me. It is. Excellent, excellent. Okay. So in Judges 16, it says in verse 1, then went Samson to Gaza. We're going to spend some time in verse 1. I don't know how far into the story we're going to get. I'm changing things up. We're going to talk about however much we have time to talk about, and then I'm going to cut it short. My sermons, my goal is, famous last words of a preacher, so take it with a grain of salt, but my goal is to shorten my lessons and my sermons, right? Because I usually preach for 30, 40 minutes. And while that's better than some preachers, it is a habit I would like to break. So we're going to talk for however long we have time to talk, and then I'm going to cut it, excuse me, when we get to that point. So in verse 1, it says, then went Samson to Gaza. Now to this point, we haven't seen Samson do anything against the Lord, or against his commandments, or against his word, right? So we can backtrack a little bit. In chapter 14, we see Samson's first marriage. He falls in love with a woman, and he marries her. She's a Philistine. His parents warn against it simply because she's a Philistine, and we talked about how that's often preached like it's a mistake, but it was not. And that Samson was planning on using this relationship as fuel to start a war with the Philistines, to secretly fight to set them free from the Philistines. But he comes up with this riddle and is betrayed by his wife. She fears for her life, and he leaves for a little bit. In chapter 15, we find out that the father gave the wife away to one of his friends. He leaves again for a little bit and uses this heartache as an opportunity to start his war with the Philistines, which he does some pretty amazing stuff. And then they go and they kill the former wife, and the father and burn them with fire like they threatened to do before. And Samson goes and he fights and he slays 3,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey. So that was all. Oh, I appreciate that, Miss Christie. And I know there's a market for people who love the long form lessons, and when we get to that point someday, we'll change it back up again. But there are also those whose attention spans aren't quite that long, and I want to be able to put the Bible and our lessons on the shelf where everybody can reach it. But that really does me good to hear that, and I appreciate that so much. So that is where we're at in Judges 16. So he's been through a lot. He's trying his best to free these people with as few casualties as possible. That's so honorable. He falls in love with a Philistine woman, and he does right by her, and he marries her, and he loves her, and he's heartbroken when he finds out that she's been betraying her. She's actually been sleeping around with all of his friends and stuff, these other Philistine men and so forth. And he actually says that to them toward the end of chapter 14. And so it's heartbreaking to him to have that happen. He leaves, and then he doesn't get to see her again before she dies by being burned alive in a fire. Then he goes and he fights all these battles, but could you imagine what that does to a person's mind? So Samson's really going through a lot here. When we come to verse 1, so many times in these stories we forget these aren't characters. Right? There wasn't somebody who was trying to come up with a good story and then came up with the name Samson and came up with it. No, this is a guy who actually lived. He actually felt these things. These things actually happened to him. And he's heartbroken here. And chapter 14 and chapter 15 happen. We come to chapter 16 and we read about the first real mistake that we see him make. Now, to his age, obviously he's committed sins like we all had at that age, but this is the first one we actually read about. It says, he saw there a harlot and went in unto her. In other words, they had physical relations together. And that was his first mistake. He went into a prostitute. And to this point, we haven't seen him make any mistakes like this, but now we have. We know how many times already before chapter 16 of the book of Judges, how many times God has talked about adultery or fornication, and how many times after this he talks about fornication, and how intimacy like this should be between a man and his wife, and that's it. So we know that this is something he shouldn't have done. And a lot of times you'll read in these stories where it says God was displeased. And what people have done is they take these verses like this, where it says somebody does something questionable, and they say, well, it didn't say that God was displeased with it, so he must have been okay with it. That's not necessarily the case. It doesn't say that God was well pleased either, but there's an obvious context where it doesn't have to keep repeating itself, right? Obviously, God didn't want Samson to do this. And I think that goes without saying. However, this did not disqualify Samson from being a judge. He retained his strength. God did not take his strength away for this. There's a lot of things we can infer from this, that he was still qualified as a judge of Israel. Now, what do we learn from that, though? What we learn from this is so important. We learn that making a mistake does not disqualify you. That the reason that the Bible records so many kings as doing evil in the sight of the Lord is because that's where their heart was. Right? How many times does God say, you're about the person's heart? Their heart is far from me. You've left your first love. That's what God is interested in. When a person makes a mistake and it's genuinely a mistake and they're still interested in having a relationship with the Lord and they want to do right and fix their mistake, they want to stop making that mistake, God is not going to disqualify that person. But if a person drifts from the Lord, is no longer interested in what God thinks and only ever wants for themselves, then yes, that person will be disqualified from being able to serve the Lord. But that's not where Samson was. He's heartbroken. He had a moment of weakness, and he did this thing. But it didn't disqualify him. And when you make a mistake, it does not necessarily disqualify you, because God is more interested in repentance than he is in punishment. The purpose of punishment is to learn. But if we repent and learn that lesson on our own, then that is what the Lord would rather. And I think this verse teaches us this about the nature of our Lord. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Verse 2 says, it was told the Gazite, saying, Samson is come hither. And they compassed him, which means they surrounded the city that he was in when he committed this sin with the harlot. So these Gazites laid in wait for him all night in the gate of the city. So evidently there's a wall around the city, and there's a gate at that wall, and that's the only way in or out of the city, is through that gate. So they surrounded him. He can't get out except for this gate, and they're waiting for him like a trap at the gate. They were quiet all night, saying, in the morning, when it is day, we shall kill him. And Samson lay till midnight, and arose at midnight, and took the doors of the gate of the city. Now, I don't know how he knew there was a trap in wait for him. The Bible doesn't tell us that. But we do know that somehow he found out. Maybe he saw them laying in wait for him. Maybe they weren't as quiet as they thought they were going to be. Maybe they weren't trying to be as quiet. Maybe they thought they had enough men where they could just ambush him, whether they knew he were there or not. Maybe they're just being quiet until they had their trap set up. I don't know. Maybe somebody told him, hey, there's some people outside. Maybe he overheard somebody talking about these weird guys with swords and spears standing outside this. I don't know. But whatever it was, he found out about it. So he took the doors of the gate of the city. Now, guys, let me explain this to you. This isn't your front door. Okay? That would be impressive in and of itself. These are... I'm trying to think of something that you might know that's as massive as this, but it's all fantasy worlds for me that I can imagine. These massive, huge gates. I think bigger. Yeah, massive, huge. These were meant to keep the enemy out, and they only opened them when things were safe. Right? So these huge, massive gates that Samson came along and literally picked them up, yanked them off the rest of the wall, put them on his shoulders, and carried them up to the top of a hill that is before Hebron. Now, what you noticed or didn't notice was it saying that the soldiers sprung their trap. So they're still there. They're laying in wait for him at the gate. But when he picks up the gate, which is basically as tall as a building, and he picks up the gate and carries each door of the gates on his shoulders up a hill, you're going to be less inclined to attack him. I think probably if I had to guess, maybe the captain was like, okay, now. Guys, now. Captain, with all due respect, What do you mean, You saw him lift the wall on his shoulders, right? Well, technically it was the door. Captain. Yeah, okay. They weren't going to attack him because of how strong he just proved himself to be. What chance do they have of taking him down? So he does this amazing thing, and it says it came to pass afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Now, we know the story of Delilah, but the reason that we went through all these other chapters with Samson first, the reason the Bible lays all those chapters out before we get to Samson and Delilah, is so that you can learn where Samson's head is right now. He's grieving. And the grieving process has many stages. They don't all come in order. They don't all show up in a nice, neat little package. It's not like recovery from a surgery. You don't get a certain time period that it goes through. It could be a few weeks. It could be a few years. It could be a decade. It has its own lifespan. right? And you're going to revisit some of those cycles. And it doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong, and it doesn't mean that you're broken or that you need to be fixed with pills or something like that. It just means you're going through a grieving process, and that's okay. Because that's what we see Samson going through. It's a grieving process. And as he's grieving, he comes to the phase in this process where he's ready to try to be happy again. He's ready to try to move on. But he's afraid of committing to somebody. He's afraid of getting into a relationship again because of what happened with his ex-wife. That was horrible. He loved this woman. He just needed a little vacation to deal with the fact that she betrayed him. He was going to come back and be with this woman and love this woman. And then she was given away. And then she was murdered horribly. Imagine how he must feel. And he's afraid to love again, so he comes up to this harlot. But eventually he finds a woman named Delilah. And he's ready to love again. But he's been scarred. Right? He's been hurt. And so he's afraid that this relationship is going to end up like his last one. So a lot of what we see happening from this point on has a lot to do with him trying to avoid repeating history for himself. So keep that in mind as we keep reading, because it says in verse 5, the lords of the Philistines came up unto her. So they've learned this trick. We can scare these beloved women of his into doing what we want them to. So they're trying it again. They said unto her, entice him, and see wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and we will give thee every one of us 1,100 pieces of silver. So they've learned their lesson. Right? What happened last time was they threatened to kill this woman unless they got answers. So not this woman, but his ex-wife, his previous wife, who was killed. And that didn't work out. Samson's learned his lesson, and he left a burnt scorch mark on the Philistine lands. He tore through them for what they did to her. So they've learned their lesson. We don't want that vengeance falling on us again. So instead of negative reinforcement, we'll try positive reinforcement. We'll bribe her to betray him. So they say, if you can find out where Superman gets his strength from, or if you can find out what his kryptonite is, we will make you a very rich woman. So Delilah said to Samson, tell me, I pray thee, wherein thy great strength lieth, and wherewith thou mightest be bound to afflict thee. So in other words, she's asking him, where do you get this strength from? How are you so amazing? How do you keep from somebody taking that strength away from you? Samson said unto her, so he's giving her what she thinks is an answer, and he thinks it's never going to come up. It doesn't matter. And I don't want her giving me a hard time the way that it happened last time. So instead of refusing to answer her, I'm just going to tell her a fib. I'm going to tell her a lie. And he does. And he thinks, okay, if they bind me with 7 greens, or 7 green withs that were never dried, then shall I be weakened as another man. So he gives her this answer. She leaves him alone. He leaves her alone. Everybody's happy. Until verse 8 tells us the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 green withs, which had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now, I doubt he realizes that she's done this, that she's bound him with them. And then it says, now there were men lying in wait, abiding with her in the chamber. That's their bedroom. And she said unto him, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson, and he brake the withs, as a thread of tow is broken when it toucheth the fire. So his strength was not known. So she freaks out and screams that the Philistines are attacking them, and he breaks them, and he obviously kills all of those Philistines that tried to kill him in the chamber with his beloved, with Delilah. He's afraid for her, so he goes in, he kills all these men with his incredible strength that he still has. But she says this to him in verse 10, behold, thou hast mocked me and told me lies. Now tell me, I pray thee, where thou mightest be bound. Now, when you read this, it seems a little stupid, doesn't it? I mean, think about this, that she asks him, hey, just out of curiosity, how would I take your strength away? He tells her this lie. This lie is what the Philistines use to try to take his strength away. Then all of a sudden they're in their bedroom with her. Like, what idiot wouldn't assume that she's betraying him, right? Except think about what happened before with his last woman, with the wife that he married. They threatened her. She didn't have a choice. That she was afraid she was going to die, which she did. And he was so hurt and so angry about that. The fact that he never got to tell her, I forgive you. He wanted more than anything to say, I know you were scared for your life, and I don't hate you for that, and I understand and I forgive you. But he never got to have that conversation with her, so he's got that scar on his heart. Now here comes Delilah, and she's evidently told these men some things, and they try to take advantage with it. But he doesn't assume that she's being betrayed or that she's being paid to do this. He assumes that Delilah's going through the same thing his previous wife did. He assumes that she's being threatened by her life and that she had to tell them or that she would be killed and her whole family. So he's being understanding with her because of the pain and the grief that he's still dealing with. That's why this is going the way that it is, because he sees the woman he loved and lost in Delilah, and they're just not the same person. So again, we have a couple of lessons to be learned from this. First of all, don't let the pain of your past blind you to what's happening in your present. We think we know what's going to happen because we think we've seen it before, but life has a way of surprising you. Don't be blinded by the scars on your heart, right? And also, Samson thought he could lie to her and it wouldn't come up and it wouldn't matter and everything would be fine, and she found out that he was lying to her. So don't ever assume that you can just lie and not get caught. Your lies will find you out. So in verse 11, he said unto her, if they bind me fast with new ropes that never were occupied, then shall I be weakened as another man. Delilah therefore took new ropes and bound him therewith, and said unto him, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And there were liers in wait, abiding in the chamber, in the room, with her again. And he brake them from off his arms like a thread. And same thing, killed those Philistines as well. And Delilah said to Samson, hitherto hast thou mocked me and told me lies. Now he's been caught in a lie twice. Tell me wherewith thou mightest be bound. And he said unto her, if thou weavest the 7 locks of my head with the web. And she fastened it with a pin, and said unto him, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he awaked out of his sleep, and went away with the pin of the beam and with the web. So she tangled his hair up so that he couldn't move. And instead, what happened was he took the beam of the house with him and killed these Philistines. So in verse 15, she said unto him, how canst thou say, I love thee, when thine heart is not with me? It's a fair question. Sure. How can you say you love me when you don't think enough of me to tell me the truth? Now, she's trying to get him killed so she can become rich, and she's definitely every Delilah insinuation that there's ever been. She's a terrible person. But Samson doesn't know that. He thinks that she's being threatened. He's scared for her life. And she's asking him this question, how can you claim to... Now, if he'd have had this discretion, the best thing that would have happened is that Samson used the judgment that he had been using up to this point. And instead of making a decision based off of the pain that he was feeling, he should have continued to use the wisdom that we had seen in the previous chapters. But we see him falling apart and allowing this pain to break him and to warp him into this prideful, into this mistrusting, into this thinking I can never be got kind of person. It makes him bitter, and it makes him angry, and it creates a weakness inside of him. Honesty would have been better, but would have been even better than that, because I don't know that honesty would have been better, to tell you the truth, but I think would have been even better than that is for him to use some discretion when it comes to these women. This woman in particular, because I think he's made good choices up to this point with the harlot and with Delilah. Verse 16 says, it came to pass when she pressed him daily with her words and urged him so that his soul was vexed unto death. We've read that before, and now it's happening all over again for him. He told her all his heart and said, there hath not come a razor upon mine head, for I have been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will go from me, and I shall become weak like any other man. When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines. We know the story. She made him sleep upon her knees. She called for a man. She caused him to be shaved, or to shave off the 7 locks of his head. She began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. She said, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he woke out of his sleep and said, I will go out as other times before and shake myself. And he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. That's important. He loved this woman. He had learned this is a trap the devil had set for him. He learned to love this woman more than he loved his Lord, more than he loved God. He let this pain cause fear inside of him. Pain turns to fear. Fear turns to anger. And anger turns to suffering. The pain that he felt from losing his beloved turned to fear of losing that again. Turned to anger against those that would take her from him, and did take someone from him. And all he wanted was their suffering. He wanted to keep Delilah, and he wanted to hurt them. And by, those two things grew in his mind more and more until they crowded out the thoughts he had of God. Now, we're here at this place where he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. But remember how we ended the story in Judges 15. God clave a hollow place that was in the jaw of the donkey, and there came there out water. And when he had drunk, his spirit came again, and he revived. Wherefore he called the name thereof Enhakkore, which is in Levi unto this day. Now he gave that place a special name to remind him about what God did for him concerning the water coming out of the donkey's jawbone and sustaining him. He was so in tune with what God was doing in his life that that's where he was. And now we see this thing where he wist not that the Lord had departed from him. The Philistines took him and put out his eyes, as dark and awful and terrible, brought him down to Gaza, bound him with fetters of brass, it's like big chains around his wrists, and he did grind in the prison house. They used him as like a working animal to drag that giant stone around in a circle to grind up different things, whether it was corn or whether it was grain or whatever it was. They used him like a working beast. And they could, because this was this eyeless, disgusting creature, the way they saw him, and they just used him for that. The Bible tells us in verse 22, though, howbeit the hair of his head began to grow again after that he was shaven. They were having this large party. The house was full of men and women. And Samson called unto the Lord and said, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray, this once, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars, which was upon which the house stood and on which it was borne up, the one with his right hand, the other with his left. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. He bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people that were therein. So the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life. Then his brethren and all the house of his father came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtal in the burying place of Manoah's father. And he judged Israel 20 years. Notice the two things. At the very top of the chapter, what we talked about did not disqualify Samson. Sin did not disqualify Samson. Sin is something that we should all strive to remove from our life. The Bible tells us that many times. The Bible tells us, or the Apostle Paul even writes in the Bible about, shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? He says, God forbid. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? But I want to show you or remind you about what did cost Samson. What did disqualify him was his heart. Had grown full of resentment, had grown full of bitterness, had grown full of fear and hate. And it crowded God out of his heart, so that he loved her more than God, which was obviously a mistake. And it cost him. Folks, I want to remind you this evening, what disqualifies you from God is not specific sins. It is where your heart is. Because if your heart is right with God, you know you've done something against him, you can repent and you will try to do better the next time. But if your heart is not with God, that is what disqualifies you from the work that he wants to give you and the blessings he wants to put on you. Make sure your heart is in a good place with the Lord. Don't crowd him out with all the noise of life. All right, that's our lesson for this evening. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll be back on Sunday morning for our Cahoots game. You guys study up for it. You guys online, play with us. Hop in there. I know there's a little bit of a delay, but you'll still have a good time. We will have a good time, and we'll see you then.